Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Business Podcast, your source for all things business. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres. Keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, so today I have Shelley Klingerman on the line, and she's owner and president over at Stiletto Agency and also author of Vigilance, The Savvy Woman's Guide to Personal Safety, Self-Protection Measures, and Countermeasures. Shelley, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So excited to get into this book. I love promoting authors and bringing their works out to my audience. But before we do that, let's get a little bit further into what you're doing over at Stiletto Agency. Tell us a little bit more about the company, please.
Yeah, Stiletto is a training and speaking company and really focusing on women's safety, if you will. So that's really our focus is women's safety and even more specifically business travelers. And we're starting to reach more out into university students who are now finding themselves studying abroad and visiting countries and cultures that maybe they're not completely familiar with. So this training helps them to more confidently study abroad and focusing on what it is they're there to do as opposed to being concerned about your safety because you're kind of out of your element at that point.
That's awesome. So I want to get into this book. So Vigilance, The Savvy Woman's Guide to Personal Safety, Self-Protection Measures, and Countermeasures. So we're not going to have time to go through all this. So for the listeners, we want you to go out and buy this book. But I do want to give everyone listening a little bit of a flavor of your work. So I was looking through it, and let's just start with this one, Be a Badass. I mean, I had to start there, right?
Of course. Yeah, that's where we all want to start, right? We all want to be a badass.
So tell us a little bit more about this chapter.
So really it's setting up a mindset. So the book was really written based on my experiences as traveling as a young salesperson. Fresh out of college, I took my job at a Fortune 500 company and got put in a sales region that was fairly large. And I really had not gotten any training whatsoever to be really put in that situation. So, I'm just going to be transparent here. I found myself in some pretty cringy situations that I really just had no idea how to handle. And really, had I known what I know now, if I would have known then, I wouldn't have gotten myself in that situation because I would have recognized flags that would have said, hey, you know what, you need to think on your feet right now and redirect this conversation, this engagement, this situation. So the book came about from taking my past experience as a traveler, young female, on my own largely. I actually, along the way in my career, I produced a documentary, and that's a little bit of a side project, but it was an anti-terrorism documentary. And through that project, I had the opportunity to meet some really interesting individuals, some ex-military, some ex-law enforcement, and subject matter experts. What I would find myself is when the cameras went off for the topic that we were talking about for the documentary, I would just start asking them some questions about their tradecraft because I thought it was really interesting. And I would say, oh, what would you do in this scenario? And they would tell me. And then as the conversation would go on, they would say, well, as a female traveler, where's the position of power in an elevator? And I didn't know. I mean, I answered incorrectly. I answered in the back of the elevator so that I could see everything that was going on. The right answer is to position yourself by the panel because that's the only place that you can control the buttons so that if some creep gets on with you and you have a bad feeling about that person, you have the ability to push the alarm as opposed to them having the ability to pull the stop button and you're kind of trapped in that elevator with that person. So it was, again, my experience in talking to these subject matter experts that would share some really easy things for me to make adjustments in my daily life and the way I carried myself, but had a huge effect on my situational awareness and being that badass, like being in control of the situation. And then I now have a daughter who is studying, it's her first year in college, and she's in a major that's going to require her to study abroad. And I'm thinking, how are we preparing these kids to go study abroad when they're, the barriers for these countries are much lower, so they have access, which is great. But are we training them and giving them enough information to go over there and blend in and to be respectful and to know the culture they're going in and to be self-aware enough to be able to make adjustments so that they don't stand out and become targets? Because, right now there's some areas where Americans aren't really the most liked people, so you can become the target of just, violence or just, bad behavior. So it was really all of those things that brought together the book. And I have learned a lot along the way and wanted to just park it in a place where people could access it.
So, Shelley, two-part question here. So, number one, what are the right types of clients and or people that are a good fit to typically work out with Stiletto Agency? So, first part, and then second part, how do they reach out? Like, what's the best place for people to connect with you?
Mm-hmm. So I've been doing a lot of work with women's groups. So a lot of the companies now have put together like the women of fill in the blank. So I've done a lot of those groups. I've talked to just corporate groups in general, and it's been a mixed audience. Those mixed audiences have really good conversation that happens because I think sometimes men don't understand the situation that women find themselves in sometimes. And, again, for example, a female might be walking down the street and, we don't have eyes in the back of our head, and we tend to not want to embarrass anyone or humiliate them or falsely accuse. So if we're walking down the street and we hear someone coming up behind us, we tend to let ourselves stay in a state of discomfort, like, oh, what's going on behind me? I don't want to turn around. I don't want to, make eye contact with somebody and, make them feel bad. So we tend to let ourselves stay in that uncomfortable position. Men don't hesitate to do it, but for some reason women don't. But men, when we set that scenario out in a conversation, men will be like, you know what, I never even thought about that from a female's perspective. So what I'm going to start doing is, and actually other men shared what they do. Some men were like, hey, what I do is I will just call out ahead of me, hey, I'm coming up on you. I didn't want to startle you. Or they'll get on their phone and talk loud so that it doesn't appear that they're trying to sneak up. And then some men shared that they just cross the street and walk on the other side because they know that it's probably uncomfortable for a female. And they say, like, I think about would I want my wife to be in that position? Would I want my daughter to be in that position? So when you get a mixed group, it sometimes is a really robust conversation. So I like to do both women because women can relate to women's stories, but I also like to do mixed groups because it helps you see things from different perspectives.
That's awesome. And what's the best way for people to reach out?
You can contact me at Shelley, SHELLEY, at StilettoAgency.com.
And
you can also follow my Facebook. Yeah.
And what's the Facebook?
I can also follow me on Facebook. I'm Stiletto Agency.
And for people to pick up your book and to learn more, how do they do that?
Yeah, you can get the book on Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, Shelley, it's been great speaking with you. First, congrats on the book, and I love all the great work you're doing over at Stiletto Agency to empower women and to empower education. I love it, and great stuff there. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave me a review, do all those great things we do to support our podcasters. I really do appreciate it. And Shelley, thanks again for coming on the show.